It's the 22nd of October 2022. It's about 9 a.m. in the morning. I'm looking at number 32 in my collection of sun moon signs. Sun in Gemini, moon in Scorpio, and I've got some great examples of this. If you're born with the sun in Gemini, your nature is to be that of communicative. Whether it's communicative with oneself at the mental level, through one's mind, one's intellect and one's thoughts. And at this point, the Gemini nature is very dualistic because there's the front brain, which is the hamster on the wheel, the chitter-chatter, the non-stop verbal diarrhea. And then there's the back brain, which goes much more into meaning and the deep thoughts and the reasons rather than the actual mental words. There's the communication the Gemini sun sign will have with other through speech or telephone or text or screen, the interaction at the one-to-one level. And then there's the communication that the Gemini sun will have with the world through socializing, traveling, partying, interacting at a group level. So the essence of sun in Gemini is that of communication and networking, whether it's with oneself, other or the world. And it can have, as I say, a dualistic nature where it can be on this one hand superficial, blithe and just concentrating on the minutiae, whilst on the other hand it can actually get very deep when it ponders the deeper meaning, but then they have to suspend the front brain. Sometimes they can do both of these at the same time. The Scorpio moon personality is a very different. In English, we call it a kettle of fish. The Scorpio moon personality is someone who's essentially very private at the emotional level. They don't display their emotions or feelings that much. It takes them a long time to trust someone. They're not necessarily secretive or paranoid, but they're certainly private. And the Scorpio moon personality has got a kind of withdrawn emotional candor that looks at you from behind those dark eyes and goes, I dare you to work me out. The Scorpio moon personality will be very good at ferreting out other people's emotional problems, but not so good at displaying or expounding on their own. It's not so much secretive as more cautious and wary around displaying itself until it learns to trust someone. And with a Scorpio moon, that can be many, many years. So it's a bit of a paradox because the Scorpio moon is essentially private, deep, penetrative, behind the scenes and observant, whereas the Gemini sun is very gregarious, outgoing, communicative and networking. So it's a bit of a weird mix. Now, there's a couple of words here that describe it. One of these I had to actually look up the proper meaning of. One of the words is saponaceous. And saponaceous can be described as people who have a kind of slippery or evasive or elusive character. Another word is oleaginous, which can lead to people becoming exaggeratedly or distastefully complimentary. It's almost like, oh, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Or you might think so, I couldn't possibly comment. It's got an element of oiliness and greasiness about it as well. So there's a few classic charts here. There's the British comedian, who many of you abroad won't know of because he's long dead now, character called Bob Monkhouse, who was actually a really lovely guy, did a lot of work for charity and had some very strong personal family good stuff going on. But on the surface, he would always come across as a very sharp dresser. I'm sure he kept Brill Cream in business single-handedly because he had very slicked back, greasy hair. And he just had this element of slipperiness and sludginess and greasiness. And he was very quick with the smart-ass one-liners. And he would always be very good at the put-down whilst being complimentary, but putting them down at the same time. Another classic chart in the what I would call the oleaginous degree of this Gemini with Scorpio moon is that of Boris Johnson, the ex-British Prime Minister who's now seeking to make a comeback. No. Sorry, I digress. he also is someone who doesn't express his emotions well. Even with the sun opposite Ceres, I suspect there's a deep attachment to the female role model imagery there. Not something that's visible to the outside world. He has the sun conjunct Venus in Gemini. What you see is what you get with him. I think that Scorpio moon is somewhat, it's not badly aspected. I actually consider him to be quite stable emotionally underneath, but also very cautious about revealing anything about his true emotional nature to the world. The slippery Gemini comes through on the top, which is, how can I put it, unequivocal with very equivocal with the truth sometimes. I'm not suggesting he lies. I am suggesting he may not be completely transparent or honest all the time. And then, of course, there's the third case here, completely different. The character, the jazz musician, one of the greatest musicians of all time, Miles Davis, Gemini with Scorpio moon, Gemini rising as well. Big grand cross in his chart. Mercury exactly opposite Saturn in his horoscope. So this is someone who was never going to be a big speaker, especially with the Sun and Mercury in the 12th house. But with Mercury opposite Saturn, he found another way of communicating, still using the mouth and the airwaves, which is the Gemini in nature, but he did it for a trumpet, clarinet. He used wind instruments. That Mercury-Jupiter was square Neptune, that Mercury-Saturn was square Neptune as well, which on the one hand probably led him into substantial alcohol and or narcotic issues, because that can be quite an escapist thing where the horrors of the world, particularly for a black musician in the time he was alive, would have been quite grim. So he may well have indulged in things to dumb down the pain, but at the same time, it gave him a very visionary and creative way of expressing himself articulately without using words. I think his music spoke for him, and there was certainly nothing oily or greasy about him. So Sun, Gemini, Moon, Scorpio, weird mix, very weird mix. The good ones are ones who learn how to express their feelings in an intelligent way. The not so good ones are the ones who have basically split personalities. Catch you later.